All right, so we are here. The Angel Editors have arrived for yet another craft chat. I'm Kyle V. Hiller, and I will be moderating the chat today. And we are talking about what makes an effective action scene. And today I am joined by Diane, Jay Whistler, Denise, Jen Bailey, the whole crew. We are here live on a Sunday. Well, not quite technically live, but recording this right now on a Sunday. And how is everyone? How
Great.
is life?
Great.
Reading? How is what's on your radar these days? Tell me what's up.
Well, so I've been thinking, because we had the end of Game of Thrones last week, and a lot of people were, yeah, let's not go there. But a lot of people have been talking about what's the next big series you want to see on TV. And I was like, Dragon Riders of Pern, Dragon Riders of Pern, Dragon Riders of Pern. Yes, exactly. So I decided it's probably been 8 or 9 years since I've reread Dragon Riders of Pern, and I've read it. So this is a series by Anne McCaffrey that the first volume came out in, I think, 1968. And it's often classified as fantasy, but it's actually light science fiction. She has science fiction reasoning for everything. And it's about telepathic dragons that have been bred to eliminate spores that destroy plant life on a planet. And so I've been rereading it, and I've been enjoying it. The plot-wise, it holds up very well. It's still top on my list. I think it will make a terrific television series, and they have the technology to do dragons. So please, Dragon Riders of Pern.
I love it. I'm not quite as emphatic as Diane about my current reading, but that said, I am loving what I'm reading. I'm Denise, by the way, and I'm in the middle of Julie Berry's Lovely War, which is so smart and so good, and just go read it. It's just, she's brilliant. She's genius. And I also have started Internment by Samira Ahmed. I might be saying that correctly. And I actually put it aside because I was like, I want to give my full attention to this, because already like 2 chapters in, I was like, this is so good. I can't read this and anything else at the same time. So that's what and I started watching Poldark, which I know I'm like late to the game on Poldark and late to the game on the majesty of Aidan Turner.
You're not a Hobbit fan? Come on.
But that's what I'm watching right now.
Okay, well, so I put Lovely War on my Kindle because it's going to be my beach read. It's totally ready to go. But right now I'm reading The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert because I've heard wonderful things. It is totally intriguing. Very much involved in it. Before that, I read Dean Gloucester's Dessert First. It had been on my TBR for so long, and I was like, I need to read this, and I read it, and he made me cry. And he made me laugh, and then he made me cry again. And I gotta say, he did a great job in just like, hey, this is sometimes how it is. But without any spoilers or anything, he leaves you with some hope, and that's what you need. So I thought it was a really lovely book. What have I been watching? Well, Shrill by A.D. Bryant. You haven't watched that one yet. And so then, because I was going with the girls of SNL, I also watched Wine Country, because I'm going off with my mother and sister and aunt and cousin. We've been doing this for 19 years, going off to a week of beach, and to watch the SNL women go off to Wine Country for the weekend was just right.
Going off with my mother and my sisters to do anything would be like death for me. So good on you for taking on that trip. And I know that they're never going to see this, so it's okay that I say that. I just finished reading The Library Book by Susan Orlean, which is about the 1986 fire at the LA the central branch of the LA Public Library, and they accused someone of arson in that fire, but they never took him to trial for a variety of reasons, which she explains in this book. But there is evidence to say, basically, because of new technology and new science around arson, there is doubt about whether or not that fire was actually arson after all. So it's a good thing that they never took this guy to court. But Susan Orlean actually goes into the entire history of libraries in the United States, and it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I loved this book, loved it. It's really, really intriguing. So I highly recommend it for anybody who loves books and loves libraries. And then fiction, I just finished Louisiana's Way Home by Kate DiCamillo, which is the companion book to Raymie Nightingale, which is, I love it. I hardly ever give 5 stars to books, and I gave 5 stars to Raymie Nightingale, and which is a masterclass on character desire, which if you haven't seen the Angelella Editorial YouTube discussion on character desire, you should go back and check that out because we nailed it. I'm just saying. But Raymie Nightingale is a masterclass on character desire, and Louisiana's Way Home is a masterclass on character voice. It's pitch perfect. So that's what I've been up to.
And it's good to know that the third girl in that triumph
Beverly
is going to get her book. She's going to get her own book.
Yeah. Beverly right here. Beverly right here is going to be out in, I think, September.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
I love that series so much.
It's so lovely.
It's not really a series. I mean, they really are like getting their own.
Yeah, they're standalone.
Yeah.
I mean, Louisiana's Way Home could definitely be a standalone book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to see her. She came to Kansas City to speak, and she talked about them as companion stories, and that's exactly what they are, and they're so beautiful in their own right. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Yep.
Nice. I have just finished a couple books. I finished Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng, and then also Everything by Nicola Yoon. They're both okay. I also feel like Everything I Never Told You, it's just kind of a hard read for me because just I don't know that this book is being marketed as literary fiction, but it kind of threw me for a loop because of the way that it read. It was just kind of a lot of flashbacking and all that other stuff, which kind of took me out of the story a lot. But it had such a fantastic opening that I thought it was just going to be great, but it just loses that momentum because it's just going so back and forth in time. And I know a lot of people are not everyone loves Celeste Ng, but she's one of those authors that I feel like I support and everything, but I just may never read all the books. So power to her. And I'm also trying to figure out what my next books are going to be, but I'm not quite sure what that's going to be. So we'll save that discussion for another time. Let's dive into it. Action scenes. Whatever that may mean, however we may define an action scene, let's actually think about that for a second. Because I think we may also have different ways of thinking about what action is in a book. How do either of you, all of you, define an action scene? Because it's not just, oh no, we're going to go in and fight and all this other stuff. I mean, there's so many things that could be entailed in an action scene, especially when you start thinking about why is this action even happening. So yeah, what's an action scene to you?
I think I'm kind of in a bit of a different boat than a lot of people. Everyone here knows this about me, but my husband is a stunt performer. And so often when I'm reading books, I think, would my husband be hired if this were made into a movie to do something in this? And that's sort of where action comes into play for me. And stunt performers aren't necessarily always doing fights. There is a lot of fighting that happens, but he's been hired to like run and be chased by a car, and he's done things like been set on fire or like jumped off a building. And so like these sorts of things to me take a certain level of heightened. There's like a heightened element to an action scene, but I think I'm in a different partial place. I think action probably could be broadened outside of that, but that's always where my brain goes of like, if this were turned into a movie, who of my husband's friends would be cast to to do this or to do that? So that's where my brain goes usually.
No, I think I join you in that. I mean, I actually think that when we talk about action, that there's a physicality to it. I mean, it could be a cat fight. It could be, but I see it as more of a movement, more of there's got to be a physical, for me anyway, I think about it as that there's a physical element to it. There's a choreography to it. It doesn't have, it could be a dance. It could be it's where movement is taking place for me anyway. That's what I consider an action scene.
Yeah, I'd kind of go along with that. I would say an action scene, you can think of two different types, and one might be like a close one-on-one fight between a couple of people, which might be more close focused, but then you also have, especially if you're writing fantasy, you might have something that's very broad scope involving a lot of people, but I think you're going to have a lot more description in it than you might usually have in some passages. You're going to rely more on your setting and actually describing what is happening physically than you might in another kind of scene.
Yeah, and and an action scene doesn't have to necessarily be a fight scene, but it can be, is your character doing something that's exciting? Is your character doing something that's getting the blood pumping, the adrenaline moving? So
then bouncing off of that, what do you think makes a bad action scene in writing, and what makes it ineffective? And that may be, a very general question, but I think there's a whole lot of things we can kind of build off of that. But just right off the top of your head, what do you feel like is just what makes for a bad action scene?
I feel like when you don't really involve the characters that much, where it's just description of what is happening, we don't have any interiority. I will describe, so there's a science fiction series that I enjoy reading, that it's kind of a space opera, it's military sci-fi. And I enjoy it for reading the characters and for the political intrigue, but there also are long portions of these books that are strict action describing military conflicts in space and how all the ships are moving and the strategy. And I skim those. I just don't find them interesting. And that's fine. I feel like there's an audience who are totally they want to know about acceleration and turnover and all those kinds of strategy things. So you just have to kind of know what you're writing and what your audience is. But for me, when I'm just reading something that's not going for that tone, if there's no interiority in there, I lose interest really quickly. I need to see the characters.
I absolutely agree. And when you're close third person throughout an entire book, or even first person, and suddenly the action scene happens, and you're starting to describe what the opponent's doing or what the guy over in the corner is doing while you're in the middle of a fight, that's not what it is. And I think more often than not, I'm seeing from a writer, they're trying to figure out themselves what's going on. So they're starting to write the whole idea of what this fight entails, whether it's, a guy cheering the fight on, or a girl, somebody trying to hail down a teacher so they'll pay attention. It just seems a lot of times when we get involved in an action scene like this, the camera view or the point of view becomes this omniscient 100-mile above the action, looking at all of it. And it can't. If you're first person, third person close, you have to stay with that main character. You have to talk about only what they're feeling, only what they're doing. not what's going on around them. And it just feels like that's what's done wrong often, is it gets too broad and too complicated.
I think too, there's something to be said for how are you setting up that action, and then how are you coming off of that action? I think often you get to the fight scene and then things are happening in the fight scene or in the action scene. And you're like, wait, would the character even do that? And enough hasn't been done to build to the point where that character actually would fight in that way. Or I think you see this a lot in film too, and TV, is, suddenly the character knows how to like wield a sword when they would have absolutely no way of knowing how to wield a sword, so building up to be able to say like there is motivation in leading up to it. And then what's the after effect, especially if there's violence involved? Violence, in my opinion, should never be taken lightly. And I think too often an action scene happens and then there is no like effect that happens on the character after. It's like, whew, wow, glad we got through that. Like, wait, no, that person, like, to actually hit someone or to inflict violence on someone or to have violence inflicted on you, there is an emotional response to that. There is an effect from that. And so for me, I think I agree with everything Jen and Diane said, and I would add on to it, how are you building to it? And then what are you doing after the fact as well?
So if I'm just going to jump in because just quickly, all I can think about is the Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost Ark. When you finally, after all of that, when he finally gets on the ship, right, and Marion's trying to help him, she's putting ointment on. He's like, ow, out, don't. Duh. I mean, that is just what you're talking about. There's a cost. There's a cost to getting hurt. And how many times do we see somebody just get up and run away? It's like, I'm sorry. No. You got hit in the kneecap with a pipe.
Yes, exactly. And again, maybe this comes down to like, again, I analyze this is like part of our fun as we sit around and we analyze these things. It's sort of weird, but we'll definitely watch something and we're like, wait a minute, hang on. That's not, no, wait. And I think that this is so true. It's like the character who, just got their jaw broken and then all cool and suave takes a swig of their, whiskey. And you're like, your jaw's broken, but you wouldn't be able to do that. Like, so I think when you're getting into it, and also knowing why you're doing it, why do you have the action there? What's the purpose of it? If it's just something that's cool, like anything, I feel like with anything else that you're doing in a story, you need to know why it's there and it needs to have a purpose for why it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't have violence for violence sake just because, the story is getting, I've reached that saggy middle. And so I'm going to throw a violent scene in here. I'm going to throw something action oriented in here just to perk it up. That is not going to, that's not going to solve your saggy middle problem. That's just going to exacerbate everything. There needs to be a point. There needs to be some reason that it's going to move the story forward in some way. It's going to reveal character in some way. There's got to be a reason that you have that there. A couple other things that I think can contribute to really bad action scenes are if you don't have enough setting description so that we don't know exactly what is happening. We don't know who is where in space, and you just like people are coming and going, and we don't really know where everybody is, and so we do need a little bit of stage direction every once in a while, and there's a fine line, because you can get too much stage direction and then it just sounds like that's all you've got, and it sounds like you're writing a script, and you have to be really careful there. So it's, trying to find that balance between letting the reader be able to see what's happening, but also not overdoing it. The other thing that I see a lot of is what one of our advisors at VCFA calls the pause button violation, where there's almost too much interiority, where they're thinking about something and they stop to remember how this reminds them of something else in their past, or they start to take in some little detail that might be important later on for some reason. And but you got to remember that when you are in the midst of a fight or something, you got to remember that fight or flight mode. You are zeroed in on what you're focusing on right in that moment. You are not focusing in on the details. Like Jen, you were talking about, the guy in the audience cheering you on, or the girl doing whatever it was she was doing. I can't remember what you said, but those 100-foot view things, those those are pause button violations, that your character is not going to see those things. Your character is definitely not going to be thinking about those things. And it takes you out of the action. It takes you as a reader out of the action. And then all of a sudden you've lost all the momentum in that action scene. And, you're just like, it's a snooze fest at this point. So
I think you also bring up a good point, Jay, of that it loses the tension, right? Like,
yeah.
What's going to happen? Oh, wait, we're looking over here now at this bird flying by. It cuts that out. So you're not, you're breaking that tension. And part of the great part about action scenes is that they provide natural tension. It's just there,
Exactly.
And if you're first person, you're only going to notice what your main character notices. I mean, if he's been punched in the face and he's now bent over with his nose bleeding, or let's say, I mean, because we keep going to fights, but let's say he's in a dance. Let's say that he's dancing. He finally got the girl. He's not going to notice certain things that are going on around him. So he's not going to notice Big Ugly coming up behind him to take the girl back or whatever.
Or somebody over there pouring alcohol in the punch bowl. I mean, he's just not going to notice that. Yeah.
Right. We have to remember who our character is, where they are, and stick there.
Right.
So then, when we are looking at these fight scenes that need work, what are some of the first steps to revising a fight scene?
Well, for myself, seriously, what I do is I make a map. Okay, this might be weird, but I have seen in one of my books where something needs to happen in a factory. And I had to know where everything was in that factory, where the equipment was, where the aisles were, where things were stored. Because I see that a lot too. Is like they start off in one place where at least we, the reader, believe, oh, they're in the office. And the next thing you know, they're picking up the fryer basket. It's like, wait a minute, there's no fryer baskets in the office. So I think having a really strong sense of the physical space that whatever the action is happening in is important. Can you get from here to there in this moment? Is this truly available to you? Because action, things are happening. You're moving. So let's plot out the space and the area as you've described it probably 1,000 times before, and make sure that you're true to what's there and to distances and objects and the rest of the physical space, the setting, as Jay had said.
I would add on to that too, Jen, costume, like what is your character wearing? If you have a character who slipped on their sexy piece of heels and now they have to run through this factory, are they going to trip? Are they going to fall? Are they going to stop and kick their shoes off? Like what, understanding. And then, I often think of them very much, as you can see through like theatrical terms, like what are all the tech theater elements? What's the lighting that's happening? Can they see things? What is the, like you said, the setting parts of it? What are the props that are there? What are the costume pieces? Are there any, is there any smoke in the room? Like what sort of all of the physical elements that could be hindering it. And then I would say too, especially, because I think again, as you were saying, Jen, that we often do think of these as, fight scenes or violent scenes, tracking what's physically happening to your character. Did they get punched in the face. Where exactly did they get punched in the face? You know, did they get punched in the gut? Where exactly? Was there a stab to the shoulder? Where exactly in their shoulder? Like being very, very specific about physically what's happening to the character, so that you can do some of the stuff that we were just talking about, you know, where you are tracking like, oh, this happened to their shoulders. They probably wouldn't be able to lift their arm up to do this huge, you know, thing or whatever they're going to do.
I would add also is even if you are writing a very big, broad battle scene, is to choose one point of view character. So even if you're writing in third person and there's many characters, you know, focus on one point of view at a time. I hate to use examples from movies because I feel like a lot of the problems that people have with writing action scenes is because they're trying to transcribe things they see in their head that they've seen in movies. And it just doesn't work the same on screen as it does on film. But I think a couple of really great examples, if you look at the Battle of Helm's Deep from The Two Towers, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, that is a massive, massive action scene. But in every part of that action scene, they are focused on an individual character. So you always are seeing it from a certain character's point of view. Another fantastic on-screen battle would be the Battle of the Bastards from the Game of Thrones. It's all from Jon Snow's point of view. And so you are seeing cavalry charges, you are seeing hand-to-hand combat, you are seeing all these different things, but it's through one person's point of view. You're seeing the bodies stacking up, and it's all from one person's point of view. And I think that helps keep it grounded, because when it's actually on the page, and I've been reading some things lately. So like I said, I've been reading The Dragon Riders of Pern, and there have been a couple of duels in there. And even though the book itself is told from an omniscient third person point of view, and every time there's a duel, it's from one person, the good guy's point of view. It's all about him reacting, judging his opponent, reacting to their, you know, thinking strategy in their head. Oh, what is he going to do? How am I going to counter that? So you have moments of interiority, so you know what's important, plus you have the actual physical events that are happening. And I think that kind of mix is easier for the reader to take in than this giant picture where they don't know where to focus.
Well, plus it helps because we're connected emotionally. We need to be connected emotionally to the action, even though it's exciting and weaving in and out. And so when we have that one viewpoint character, we feel their panic, we feel their concern and worry and pain. And that's important to keep a reader tucked in.
Yeah. I think you also need to figure out what about this particular scene is going to move your plot forward, and what is going to be revealed about your point of view character. And so, you know, I'm going to use The Princess Bride as an example. The sword fight between Wesley and Inigo Montoya, after Wesley climbs up the rock face wall, and before, you know, like right when Wesley gets to the top of the cliff, before you know, while he's giving Wesley a chance to rest, Inigo Montoya goes into the description of why he is, you know, what he's been doing for the last 20 years. He's been looking for the six-fingered man, and why he's been looking for him, because the six-fingered man killed his father. And so then they start the fight, and Inigo Montoya says, "You seem like a decent fellow, I hate to kill you." And Wesley says, "You seem like a decent fellow, I hate to die." And so then and while they're then they talk about different sword fighting methods and teachers and different things like that. And then they talk about how neither one of them is left-handed. And then Inigo Montoya says, "Who are you? I must know." And Wesley says, "Well, get used to disappointment." And he says, "Okay." And then Wesley knocks him out. Instead of killing him like you would normally do in a sword fight, Wesley knocks him out because he says, I'd sooner cut off my own hand than kill a master like yourself. And so what we learn about these men is that they are of high moral and ethical character. And we also discover Inigo's emotional and concrete desires in this particular scene. So it moves the plot forward. And we also learn, we also know that once this scene is over with, we know that Wesley is off to find Buttercup, and then he's going to have a fight with Fezzik at this point. But it's moving the plot forward, and it's revealing character for both of these characters. We're learning about them both. So, that's something that we need to see in any action scene. I think that's really, really important.
Although I have a caveat, and this is coming from, I love that, and the way that is staged on the film, I think is done very well. My caveat is, if you have ever been involved in any kind of competitive sparring, and I'm coming to it from a place, I am a 4th degree black belt in Taekwondo, and I've competed nationally where you are doing 90-second rounds, you do 3 90-second rounds. If you are fighting full bore, you do not have time to converse.
To be talking.
Talking back and forth, talking back and forth. So if you watch that scene on The Princess Bride, it's interchange. They're testing each other, and then they pause, and they talk.
Yes.
And they test each other, and they pause, and they talk. So these scenes, like I said, a lot of things, I think a lot of bad habits we get are from watching the movies, where you have superheroes, and superheroes have impressive strength and incredible stamina, and real life humans. No, you can't go for more than a couple of minutes full bore and be talking. No, go out and go out and run the fastest mile you can, which is 4, 5, 6 minutes. Can you talk during that? No. So yes, you can have interior monologue. If you stage it right, you can have dialogue, but don't go overboard, please.
Yeah. Can we pause for a second to talk about Diane's 4-minute mile? You
run
a 4-minute mile.
Yeah. Right.
That
the fastest mile, I'm like, so 10 minutes.
Right. Roger Bannister, whoever it was.
Yeah, I'm just talking about, your optimal human person. Yeah. Your optimal human person.
Right. Well, I guess that gets back to like knowing your character.
Yeah. How physically fit are
and I will admit that scene does not focus on one character as Diane suggests that we do, that we choose one POV character. That one, we learn about both of those characters. It reveals character on both of them. So, there are some differences in that regard. So,
but I would say it's because we don't know either character. We don't know that's Wesley. We really don't.
Right.
Not at the beginning.
Right.
I mean, we're not supposed to know. Not supposed to know.
We know.
So, and we don't know what's happened to him. Once we know, we don't really. So in a way, it's a revelatory scene. It's like we're supposed to be getting to know both of these characters.
Right.
But when it comes to that, to well, how fit are they? How this are they? My dad gave me books to read when I was a kid. John D. McDonnell, who wrote these wonderful
Travis McGee
books. And I swear, those were probably some of the best books ever for fight scenes or something, because Travis knew how to fight. And he would look this guy up and down. He goes, well, 20 years ago when he was a football player, he was probably pretty quick, but now he's thick in the middle. And he's winding. He's winded already, and we just stood up. And he went through all of that. He would figure it all out. And he'd be like, I'm going to let him do the windmill punches. I'm going to come in close. He's going to punch me on my shoulders, on my back, and then when I have my opening, I'm going to clock him once. Right in the schnoz. And it was this great thing where he really gave you the idea. I remember there was a part in there, and I've always remembered this for more years than I care to count. He said, the most people, you can end a fight with one blow, because most people will stop when they are confronted with sharp, unexpected pain. And I think that's true. I've not ever been in a fist fight. I've never been in a fist fight. Sure, I've been in, cat fight. I mean, like talkie, like let me make you have an eating disorder fight. But, but I've not ever
Jen Bailey.
been in a fight, a physical fight. And I knew if I suddenly got punched in the face or slapped across the face or maybe even shoved hard, I just want to sit down and go home. I mean, it's not something that I know, and I don't think it's something that many people know. And so I think
I grew up in Detroit.
But I think I think what everybody's bringing up though is it comes back to character again. It always comes back to character. Like understanding your character. I think that to go back to your question, Kyle, of like what needs to be done. I think it's a lot of side writing, a lot of side work. If it's something doesn't feel believable, it's probably because you haven't built up enough. Again, going up to it for your character to actually do the things that you're talking about. And I think too, there's something to be said for then understanding what would motivate your character to get into some sort of physical thing, like even what you were talking about, Jen, of just like again the non-fight, what would motivate them to run away rather than fight? What would motivate them to maybe climb a tree and try to hide rather than fight? Like what is it about your character that's motivating these choices? And then how are you then again, as going back to everything, how are you then complicating it? How does then the tree branch fall, and what does that fall feel like? And then your character's hurt, and then now they have to actually face the bully who's standing in front of them and actually do something about it. Like I think that the basics of storytelling come into fight scenes as well too. And character motivation is a huge part of that, and also understanding and knowing your character is a huge part of that too. What would actually, if you are going to think about it from a fight scene angle, what would actually get them to the point where they would feel comfortable enough to swing that fist, right? And how are you building that tension? How are you building up to that point? If it's something that your character wouldn't do, would you put that in the middle, or would you put that towards the end? How would you build to that moment? And again, how would you plant those seeds throughout in order to have that bloom when it actually does happen? I often think about, my husband and I talk about Romeo and Juliet a lot when it comes to fight scenes, because most people, when they think about the like seminal moments, I don't think people often think about the Mercutio Tybalt fight, but it is the moment. If they never got into that fight, and Mercutio never died, I'm getting that right? I'm not kidding.
Yeah. You are.
Mercutio never died. Romeo would never have taken action against it. That wouldn't have happened. He never would have gotten banished. If none of that, if that fight didn't happen, the play would have gone in an entirely different direction. And like, talk about that being a part of the story. Talk about that being a crucial part of the story. The whole second half of that play happens because of that fight and because of the actions that the characters took as a result of that fight. So I think that when you're writing any action scene, it becomes so important to look at the character and the story. How is it contributing, what you were saying, Jay, to like revealing character? How is it moving that plot and story along? And without those things, do you need it? And if you don't need it, then you should cut it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like when it comes to action scenes, I think a lot of times people think that action scenes are an opportunity to deviate from whatever the norms are in your story, as opposed to understanding the fact that an action scene really isn't any different from any other scene, because every scene has action. So it's almost as if it's sort of a double entendre, because it's action and scene are the same thing. So when we do think about fight scenes and things like that, people aren't approaching it in such a way that they're structuring it to have that action that is going to have consequence, that is going to make the character think, hey, I have to do this thing now because I did this. So it just keeps pushing the story forward. So I think that's pretty much the thing with it. Your action scene, your fighting scene, and even with all the other scenes, whether it be with dancing, whether it's a love scene or any of these kinds of scenes, there's so many different kinds of scenes, and fight scenes is one of them. You still have to approach them the same way, and pretty much how you all have described so eloquently. So I think we've kind of touched on so many different things as far as that. But Um, do you feel like is there anything in an action scene that we've kind of have not touched on as far as like, do we think action scenes should be shorter or longer? Do we ever need them really as far as just the way that we've described scenes? How do we even really describe a scene? I mean, there's so many things that we kind of go into, but what are some of your like final thoughts on action scenes, basically, that we should?
Well, as far as length, I really think it helps in an action scene if you decrease the length of your sentences and the length of your paragraphs, have a lot of white space on the page. I was reading up before I came here for some books that I think do action very well, and I just randomly picked a couple of scenes in the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan, because I think those do action. I mean, they're filled with action, they're jam-packed with action. And when you look at an individual page, there is a lot of white space. There's a couple of lines, there's maybe 3 or 4 lines in a paragraph describing something that's happening, and we move to the next paragraph, and we maybe have a couple lines of dialogue. At each point, he's giving out the reader, this is where Percy is, and maybe here is where somewhere else, and here's a new paragraph to let us know, okay, here's what's happening with the setting, whether it's an explosion or a tidal wave, and that's a couple of sentences. And then we move to another sentence to, okay, here's what's happening to this other character. So they're very involved. There's a lot of things happening, but on the page, it's very short, it's easier to read, and it also moves more quickly. And I think, that's something I always recommend with action scenes, is to look at creating white space and making your sentences shorter.
I want to add one thing before I directly respond to that. I think in action scenes, it helps to know what the action is. Like, I should not write a taekwondo scene without talking to Diane. I mean, how many times have you read a scene where you actually do the thing, like either riding a horse or whatever, and the person has it totally wrong? They just have what they've witnessed on TV, and they think this is how it is. It's kind of what we were talking about. Can you run that mile and still speak? I think that if you're going to have an action scene that involves something specific, surfing or whatever, you really need to know it. And if you don't know it, find somebody who does, who can explain it to you, or have them read it for you to make sure that you're doing it right. But when I think about action scenes, I go to Patrick Ness and is it The Knife of Never Letting Go? It's like, I'll be honest, I thought the book was like 300 pages too long, but but in the beginning, before I got tired of it all, the action scenes were amazing. And I noticed he definitely employed that short sentences, a lot of white space, and then at other times he employed run-on thick paragraphs. And if you look at them, it always depended, was he acting or was he reacting? And he changed it up. So you got a sense, you got a true feeling of what was going on when the main character, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, when he was acting, you had white space, you had short sentences, you had fragments, you had all of this hesitation because he was hesitating. He wasn't a character who was used to violence or who was used to having to do a lot of that action. When he was reacting, when he was running away, when he was frightened, it was this run-on, amazing sentence that literally left you out of breath because you were running away too. You were just as scared. You were in that flight mode and you were panicked. And when you panic, you don't think in bursts so much as you think in this run-on, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How am I going to, oh, I don't know. And he wrote it that way. And it was brilliant. And I loved it until I didn't.
I was actually going to say the same thing, Jen, that, I think that not about Knife of Never Let It Go, about the way you're formulating it on the page. I think it's about reader experience. How do you want your reader to experience these moments? And I think what you're talking about, Jen, is the way you craft something on the page to give a reader, to not let a reader out of the moment. Like by giving white space, you're giving the reader the actual space on the page to take a breath. But if you don't want your reader to take a breath, if you want your reader to be in this and to be like, I can't breathe, like, as you were saying, out of breath. If you pack it all together, it doesn't give them a chance to breathe. So I was actually going to say the exact same thing, Jen, of like considering your reader, what you want your reader to be experiencing. And you can only control that to a certain extent, right? Like you don't know your reader's background. You don't know what they're coming to the story with. You don't know any of those things. So you can only go to a certain extent with that, but that is one like technique that you can do to try to shape that reader experience a little bit. And then the other thing I was going to say is, you know, not to bring it down at all, but, you know, I've in my other work that I've done, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of individuals who have experienced violence on a very intimate level, on a very extreme level, and don't take it lightly. I would say that that's my big takeaway. Don't take it lightly, because for individuals who have experienced that, it is life-changing when you've experienced violence, and it does shape who you are. And it doesn't mean that you are beholden to stereotypes. So be careful of stereotypes too, of you know, what a person experiences when they've experienced some sort of violence, because it should be specific to your character and who your character is, but to not take it lightly and to handle it with care.
I think that's a great point. To get to your question, Kyle, about, you know, how much action is too much or not enough or whatever, you know, Chuck Palahniuk talks about that, and he basically says that, you know, we don't live our lives sitting around talking. So when he's writing, he is like, all of his story is action. Everything is action. So, you know, for him, there's not too much. And, you know, I love his writing. I don't necessarily love his stories, but I love his writing. So, you know, one of the things he says is, I like to get people moving and jumping. I think it's good to add more emotion and chaos. And I think that in a way that's kind of, you know, he's kind of right, because when you get people moving and you get chaos around them, you learn how what people are really like in chaotic situations. That reveals their true character. He also says, if emotion can create a physical action, then duplicating the physical action can recreate the emotion. And I kind of like that too, because if someone is in a heightened state of emotion, then and for some reason you need to recreate that emotion in your story, then getting them to recreate the action that got them there is another way to do that, to put them in another action scene. So I wouldn't say that, you know, oh, you can only have 3 action scenes in a novel. You know, it's, I don't think there's a formula for it. I don't think that we can say, you know, you can make sure that there are only 3 pages, or, you know, whatever. I think it all depends on your character. It all depends on the situation. It depends on the emotion. It depends on the concrete and the emotional desires. There are so many things that are going to determine what's appropriate. But the one thing that I would say is, make sure that every action scene that you have is different from the one before it. Don't just keep repeating the same thing over and over again. And what I mean is, you know, obviously you're not going to just write the same, you know, the exact same scene. But when you're writing, let's say you have several different fight scenes, make sure that they're very different from one another. And I'm going to go back to Princess Bride as an example. There are a number of fight scenes in there, but they are all different from one another. You've got Wesley and Inigo Montoya in the very beginning with this fight scene, and then you've got Wesley and Fezzik, and that's hand-to-hand combat. And then you've got Inigo Montoya and Count Rugen, and that's another sword fighting scene. But here you've got very, very different, because there's sword fighting, but Count Rugen is not ethical and moral. And then he runs away, and then it's running through the castle. And then when Rugen finally gets kind of cornered, he turns around and he stabs Inigo Montoya, and it's a very cowardly way that he does it. So all of these scenes are very different, and they all reveal character, and they all move the plot forward in very different ways. So even though they are all fight scenes, and 2 of them are sword fighting scenes, they're very different. So make sure that you are aware of that, and you are thinking about that as you are crafting your scenes, your action
As
scenes.
Denise says, it comes back to character, right? I mean, what would your character do in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
And the motivation isn't always the same, so the outcome isn't going to be the same.
Right, right.
I'm going to write that down.
Put it on a Post-it on your computer.
It also just like, if you think about it, it just adds so much to the scene too. Like if they're coming into it with this emotion, and you know that like something emotionally is going to be worked out in this scene too, like that, it adds so much more to the fight, and you become invested in what the outcome of that fight is if you understand what that person's bringing, or what that character is bringing to it in terms of what they need to get out of it in order to, you know, move on in their journey. Like,
my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Like Denise is saying, your action scenes should have some stakes to them. I mean, what happens on the outcome goes one way or another needs to be important.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just pretty explosions.
Well, and you've brought me to another wonderful book, and yet probably more people know the movie, is A Christmas Story, right? When he finally takes on Scott Farkus. Scott Farkus is there.
Right.
That is probably my favorite scene in the whole thing, because he just, everything that has built up, he's not bringing, if he was bringing his relationship with Scott to this fight, he would have run away like he's done 1,000 times before. Instead, he's bringing everything else to this fight, and then he leaves it all there. And there is nothing more dear than how his mother understands that this is, don't worry, this is not your child. Let's take him home and let's put him in a box and comfort him. And your kid will show back up again eventually. This was something that was out of the norm for him. He felt it, and so what he took away, as you've talked about, Denise, what he left with was almost a fear of himself, of, oh my gosh, did I do that? I can't believe that I could lose control of myself to that extent. It's a fantastic scene, and yet it busts everything that we've known until this moment about that child. But it was all building up. You can see why it happened, even though it's kind of surprising that it does.
I have to say, though, that I'm so disappointed in the mom, because she just leaves poor Scott Farkus there, and she doesn't even look at him and say, "Are you okay?"
No, she just knows he's a bully.
I know, but still, the mother in me is like, you always have to care about the children.
It's so funny you say that, Jay, because like I'm not a mom, but like all of the work that I've done, and like again, people who have experienced violence, I'm all like, that kid's he's got some other stuff going on. He's not just going to be a bully for no reason. He needs a caring hand. Like, so I do the same thing. I'm like, no, you take that boy in and you like call social services about why he would be doing that.
Maybe like in an hour after you get your 2 kids home, and you get poor, what's the brother's name? You get all that stuff off of him, Randy. So Randy's not like this anymore. You take care of that, and then you go and you see if Scott's still out in the snow,
or at least give him a Kleenex for his bloody nose, for God's sake. So beside the point.
Very spirited indeed. So any final thoughts? Anyone?
I have one. It's a pet peeve. And that is, you see it in movies all the time because visually it's great. And that is the spin move, where you see some people sword fighting and all of a sudden someone will spin and turn their back to their opponent. The only reason you spin and turn your back to your opponent is so you can sneak up and you like kick them from a side they're not expecting. So this does not really happen. Don't put spin moves don't put a lot of spin moves in your, okay. Sorry, that's enough.
So maybe then absolutely do the unexpected, to go back to Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom. It's like, here he is, he's flashing the sword. It's like, I don't have time for this, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That was a brilliant moment to just shoot the guy. It's like, come on. What are you going to do? Drop your gun and pick up a pole? I mean, come on. It's like, sometimes when you got places to be, just get things done.
The reason he ad-libbed that is because he was getting over the flu and he had no energy. So that was an ad-lib from Harrison Ford.
It was brilliant, though.
Think about, what is your character going through? Is your character just, I'm so tired, I cannot I'm just going to shoot the guy because I have no energy for another.
I don't got time for this.
I never knew that. That's brilliant.
Oh, yeah. He thought
that.
it up.
Oh
Yep.
my God.
Which all comes back around to what I was saying of like, know what happened before for your character. If your character's sick, would they sit around and like deal with this, or would they pull their gun out and shoot somebody? Don't just shoot somebody willy-nilly, people. It's actually
It wasn't willy-nilly. He was being threatened.
But he had places to go, okay? Ain't nobody got time for that, okay?
He had stuff to do.
Speaking of, I have to go. I actually have to leave a little early. So thank you for this wonderful chat, everyone. My name is Denise.
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up. Denise, before you go, where can people find you?
They can find me on my website, denisesantamaro.com. My Twitter handle, which is D.A. Santamaro, I believe.
It's D.A. Santamaro.
It is. Thank you, Kyle.
You're welcome.
And I'm Denise Santamaro, also on Instagram, and that is the places that you can find me. So thank you so much for a great chat, ladies.
Yeah.
And Kyle.
Ladies, it's fine. Diane, where can people find you?
You can find me at dianetelgen.com. You can find me at Angelella Editorial. You can find me on Twitter at Original Neglet, and Neglet is just Telgen spelled backwards. And that's where you'll find me. I'm not on Instagram because that's just a bridge too far for me. I got all I can handle with Twitter.
Fair enough. Jay, where can people find you?
You can find me at Jay Whistler on Twitter and jaywhistler.com, and also at Angelella Editorial.
Great. And Jen?
I am Jen Bailey on Twitter and jenbailey.com. And I am on Instagram, but only as a stalker. I go there and look at everything else. I don't post, but there I'm Jen C, as in Cat Bailey, and I'm obviously on Angelella.
Great. You can catch me on Twitter and Instagram at Kyle Literally. You can also check me out online, kylevhiller.com. You can find all of us at angelaeditorial.com. We're also on Twitter at Angel Editors. We're also on Instagram and Facebook at Angelella Editorial. That's Angelella Editorial. We've got a Word Nerd Chat coming at you on Monday, June 3rd, 2019. So be sure to check us out then. Hit the like button and subscribe so you can get notified when we've got new videos. Hopefully we'll be doing some more in the future. Or be sure to subscribe to our newsletter as well so you can kind of get the scoop whenever we have something coming at you. So thank you everyone for joining us for this craft chat, and it has been lovely. So remember everyone, write better action scenes. And this has been Craft Chat, and we're gone. See ya.
Thanks, Kyle. Bye, everybody.
Bye.